All right. Hi, everyone. We're just going to allow all the attendees a few seconds to log on. But thank you again so much for joining us. We're always excited to partner with women in cable technology communications. Sorry about that. It's always been a fantastic partnership with us. We've hosted a handful of events with this organization before. And so what we're doing in this session is we're actually bringing back a panel that we did back in May for a second session on work-life balance. We know that the world looks a little bit different than it did in that May, June time that we were all dealing with. So I think it's going to be a really fantastic session where we can recap, old talking points and talk about like how our work-life balance has transformed over the past few years. So for any of those just logging on right now, my name is Elizabeth Lamb. I'm the Partnerships Manager for Breaking the Glass. Breaking the Glass is a women's career development and diversity inclusion initiative founded and created by Computer Futures. Computer Futures is our wonderful sponsoring company. They specialize in placing folks in contract positions for Salesforce, BI, mobile, your various software development languages as well. And what was really important to the leadership team at Computer Futures when they were growing out their business in the United States was that they started having a positive impact on gender equity within the tech space. As women in technology, we all know that it's a challenge that we're looking to tackle. But Computer Futures understood as recruiters, they have a big responsibility to play a big key role in tackling gender equity. They're the first people to look at resumes. They're constantly fighting unconscious biases as well. So throughout that process, they created a grassroots movement called Breaking the Glass. Breaking the Glass was first in the Austin area, just having events all around town with the various companies. And now we are a national organization. We've been just putting out webinar after webinar since work from home life started. And it's been an amazing experience because we get to bring so many people across the country together to have these amazing conversations. So without taking up any more of your time, I know you're excited to hear from all our panelists. I'm going to pass it over to Liz, who is moderating, and we'll introduce you to our other speakers. We do have another speaker who will be joining us about halfway through. Life happens, meetings happen, people have conflicting schedules, so we're all making it work, but we're all going to be excited when Pamela joins us again. And throughout the session, if you have any questions, you can chat them into the Q&A box at the bottom, and we will be sure to start addressing those at the end of the panel. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Liz and see y'all at the end of the session. Have a good one.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I hope everybody is well and safe. Thank you for joining us today. I'm looking forward to hearing our panelists' views on what to expect to be the lasting impacts and how to cope with work-life balance as our personal and professional lives become even more blurred. So before I introduce everyone, just want to make sure everyone to keep the background noise on a minimum, if everyone could mute themselves. And if you'd like, as Elizabeth said, if you'd like to ask the panelists a question, please post in the chat space, and we'll also be recording this session. So I'm Elizabeth Lynch, also known as Liz. I'm Client Relationship Manager at Computer Futures. And so we're an IT staffed augmentation firm, and I'm also a member of the board of Breaking the Glass. I would like to now pass over to our panelists. Our first panelist up is Ishmael. And go ahead, tell us a little bit about yourself, Ishmael.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Ishmael Godfrey. I am CEO and co-founder of Apiary. We are a marketplace platform that matches busy families to vetted and experienced care providers, no matter what the childcare situation is.
Thank you so much, Ishan. And Florence.
Hi, I'm Florence Schaefer. I'm VP over at Estee Lauder Companies. I look after strategy, operations, and innovation for the tech division over there. I grew up in California, so worked in the Silicon Valley for quite a few years before hopping over to Europe and Hong Kong, where I worked in across the Asia region for a bit, and then more recently about 3 years ago, I guess not that recent, 3 years ago, moved to New York, which is where I'm based now.
Thank you so much, Florence. And later, Pamela will be joining us. Pamela Gibbs is a design researcher over at Walmart, and she just completed her PhD, and she's a member of the Board of Trustees of the Anita Borg Institute for Women in Technology, a Black Computer Fellow, and a member of Xi Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. So she'll be jumping on in the middle of the call. And let's just get started now with our questions here. So, sorry, one moment. They just disappeared on me. So, work-life balance has long been a conversation among working women and professionals. How do you think the conversation around what is good work-life balance is transformed, and what does good work-life balance look like in 2020?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. You know, it's really interesting because I know that whole phrase work-life balance would give me a lot of anxiety because I think that it made me always feel like I need to find more, I guess, time outside of my work, and I was doing things in the wrong way. I actually really have always loved my work. I'm very passionate about it. And so depending on who you would ask, right, they would say, you know, you're a bit of a workaholic. And I think that I've, you know, found a much healthier relationship with how I think about that. And it's really more based on energy and sort of my own maintenance of energy, right? So there were moments where I would work too hard or I would burn out in the past. And I realized that it was more about where am I spending my energy, and am I spending them in ways that really fuel me and excite me and inspire me. And so instead of this idea of work-life balance, it's really more around how am I, you know, structuring my life in day to day or on a monthly basis in a way that really, you know, is sustainable. I think that's kind of the more interesting question and something that we've been talking about with colleagues and some of my peers.
I think work-life balance has really taken a new meaning in 2020. Early in 2020, when COVID first hit, you know, people were scrambling to figure it all out, both at home and at work. And I think that just kind of changed what we had always perceived work-life balance to be. You know, 9 months in, we are now seeing a new shift in what work-life balance is. And I don't even think that term is often used as much. I think what has really evolved during this period of time is people are now starting to talk more about mental health as a way to get more work-life balance. So much has been on our shoulders, particularly for women during this COVID period, that I don't even think it's right to talk about how to strike a balance, but I think now we're kind of really in that survival mode and figuring out, okay, how much longer do we have of this pandemic? Am I going to be able to make it as a sane person at this finish line? How am I going to cross that finish line? So for us, however we want to define it today, I think all of us really should sit down and think about how are we making sure that our mental and physical health is here to help us get through during this period.
Thank you, Ishwan.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that I love that you bring in that mental health aspect, and it's something, right, newer being discussed, because I think it's so easy for us to understand, are we physically exhausted, right? But there's that mental, the emotional, and even kind of spiritual purpose related energy, and, you know, where are we on these different spectrums? And I think it's great that people are open and willing to talk about them now.
Agreed. Yes. That plays right into our next question, which I'll hand back over to Ishwan. You talk about the concept, crushing the concept of being a superwoman, and how the idea of doing everything on your own is damaging and leads to burnout. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one, we have to step back and think about why does a concept of a superwoman even exist? And I really want to thank all of our foremothers that came before us in the workplace who really had to break that ground, right? She had to prove to her husband that she can make sure that dinner's on the table, the kids are clean and fed and put to bed, and having a job. So she had to do it all in order to convince her husband to let her work. She also had to convince her boss at work that she can make sure all her work is done well, on time, and to quality, and that nothing of her personal life is getting in the way of that. So our grandmothers, our aunts, our mothers all had to do it all in many ways in order to get us where we are. Now that we're sitting at a lot of the tables that they had fought so hard to get us at, we really need to rethink that, because now we're seeing all the effects of doing it all. We're seeing a lot more, problems with not just mental health, but also with chronic illness. Chronic illness comes from the fact that stress is not addressed. And when you have prolonged stress, it leads to burnout. And when you have prolonged burnout, it develops into all these chronic illnesses. And let me tell you, the medical industry is loving this because it's costing $3 trillion in medical expenses for us to deal with our chronic illnesses. And even if we think about the superwoman concept, it's this child gets hit by a car and she has this adrenaline to pick up that car and rescue that baby. That is a very short-term energy focus. As Florence was talking about energy, we seem to think that superwoman lives day in, day out, 24/7, 12 months out of the year. If you watch any of the superhero movies, and let me tell you, my son is 10 years old, so I've watched every Marvel and DC movie there is, no superhero lives in that moment of superness for long, right? They're always doing something really heroic and super for a short burst of time, and then they have their alter ego, which is the normal everyday person. So even superheroes are taking breaks. Yet when it comes to our lives, I often see women just keep going and going and going at that super level that is not sustainable. And as I said, leads into all these other issues that we're seeing down the line. Oh, we lost you a little bit there, Liz, on the audio.
I'm on mute here. Oh, and so Florence, I know when we were chatting earlier, burnout and kind of combating that as we continue to work from home, as we continue. When we first had this conversation back in June, it was more of a novel idea, kind of getting yourself structured and organized, and now it's starting to wear on us a bit, to the point because there isn't that separation between work and life. And what are some of the ways you've been dealing with that to avoid and cope with burnout?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an evolving one. I think we had a really interesting conversation with David Eagleman. He's a neuroscientist, which really, he was talking to us about our brains on lockdown. And I just got so many really interesting insights from his points. And, we talked about this idea that, it feels like a Groundhog's Day, right? So we often talk, there's a big joke, right? We often talk, we don't know what month it is, what day it is. We're in the same exact environment. And what happens with that is, I guess the way in which we look at sort of history is we don't have obvious milestones, I guess, sort of with these visual cues or changing your environment. You sort of have a certain way that your memory works so that you actually have these breaks. So with that, right, then you start to feel a bit like you don't have creativity. You kind of get stuck in your way of thinking in this rut, and your energy diminishes. So I think with that insight, it allowed me to really think, okay, well, what if the environment and changing it, and we are obviously constrained, but there's got to be ways to do that, right? So I started thinking, okay, how can I just, even from small scale, just change my environment? So within my day, I've been very good about trying to take breaks, to take walks, and I love doing that. But now even more so, there's the understanding that it changes my ability to be more creative within my job, right? So changing my environment, kind of even working in different aspects, even if I'm still constrained in my home, looking at how I can take my work and maybe work, here in New York, we have a bit of outdoor dining. So, can I take a meeting? Can I do something kind of from an external standpoint? So there's a little bits of that, which have really, for me, given me more space and ability to unlock my creativity again. Then of course, there's always exercise. And I think exercise is a critical thing. I don't know if you guys did this. I know everybody went and bought a Peloton. I'm not a spinner. I'm not very good at this, but I did buy a water rower. It took 2.5 months for it to come, but it did come, and I did set it up. And one of the best things, right? So there's some silver linings in all of what we're experiencing now. And it's the fact that it's just so easy to actually just jump on that thing for about 20 minutes in between a meeting. And I can do that because I'm here at home, and it just completely shifts my mindset. So I think really, again, like finding ways to shift and create those milestones or those changes in your day-to-day has really helped me kind of take myself out of this and rejuvenate my energy.
Yeah, I'll say that, I think it's getting out of the rut that really will help us power through to this pandemic finish line. So much of what I'm hearing from parents, especially, and from working women, is just the fact that it's the same old, right? And it's somehow something happened between the last time when we spoke. When we spoke last time, do you remember, Florence? We were like, we're just doing baking all the time. Like, let me tell you, no one's baking anymore. Everybody's just going to the store, to the bakery, and buying whatever they can, or they're, doing all these Zoom meetings. Do you remember the Zoom meetings where everybody was just having a Zoom party? Everybody zoomed out, right? Now everybody's just like, please call me on a phone. We're just going to chat. I don't want to have my camera on. And just a side note, thank you very much for all joining us today. It was great to put on lipstick for the first time. But I think it's getting out of that rut, right? So we've gotten into this rut. And back in in May and June when we last met, it was still new. Pandemic was still kind of new, and we were finding new things. And I think that was really energizing in many ways because we had to be forced to do new things. Now, 4-6 months down the line, it's the same thing that we're doing. And just like anything in life, if you do the things over and over again, it becomes so routine that your mind is kind of switched off. So what I've actually suggested to a lot of parents is try something new. And it could be as simple as, I'm a lefty, so I've been trying to do a lot of things with my right hand. First of all, because it's so new, it's forcing the other side of your brain to work. You have to concentrate, right? So it's all about finding moments where you can be really present. The other thing is, even when going out for walks, I find that people tend to take the same routes over and over again. There's really nothing new to see anymore. So what we've been trying to do is, for our walks, is take a different route. Even if you're driving, drive a different route, just to kind of get a new perspective. Because again, when you're starting to see and experience new things, it's when your body sort of slows down and makes you focus and makes you look at things in that moment. And that's when I think we really can start to, relax, rejuvenate, and feel really connected versus this, the reason why it's called Groundhog's Day is because it's the same thing that happens over and over every single day, every single hour. So trying to break off that hamster wheel if we want to continue on with the gerbil analogy there.
Well, and I love your theme around evolution, right? Because what worked for us in the past doesn't mean that that's what's going to work for us in the future. And being so mindful of that. So what worked for us in the beginning of the pandemic, right? Those are not the same necessarily habits or rituals that we want to keep. It's a great point.
Yes, I agree. A lot has changed since we first started out. And now, in terms of, I think these are all amazing and creative ways to cope with burnout in ourselves. For our next question, what does burnout look like? And how do you identify it in colleagues and friends, or even in yourself? And how do you have those courageous conversations around burnout, confronting people with it?
I could kick it off. We can tag team it, Florence. I think oftentimes burnout is so challenging. And so happy that the World Health Organization, deemed it as a disease that we should be mindful of. And why it's so dangerous is because when you yourself is going through burnout, you don't wake up and say, oh, I'm burned out, right? It's just a slow progression downhill. and you don't even sometimes realize what's happening. And so I think a good check is, for me, I always ask, is life starting to lose color? Like if you have gone out recently, I'm in New York City, and if you're in the Northeast area and you have not noticed that the leaves are starting to change color, chances are you're probably on the road to burnout or on the road on burnout already. So those are some great ways for you to check. Other people have said, if you have taken a couple of days off for the weekend and felt like you aren't rejuvenated and ready to take on the world again on Monday, chances are you're burned out. Florence, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on how to identify burnout in yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on the key ones, and I think it's very much feeling like you're not yourself, right? Which, to your point, like it kind of degrades, and maybe as the women that I know, right, we will just keep going and going, and we'll say, we know we're tired, but we just have to get through this next thing. We just have to get through this next thing. And I think when I find myself saying that, and I'm like, I think I've been saying that a lot lately, that kind of gives me a pause and say, wait a second, I kind of said this, or, I had these other commitments or projects I wanted to do, and suddenly they've taken a back burner and I haven't done that. And you start to say, well, why would that be the case? Or I haven't seen my friends in a while, or I haven't, called my parents, or, these sorts of things that generally are part of our routines. And you say, like, what kind of has happened? But I love that point about the color. I think you're absolutely right. Like the color in our lives, that spark, right? So that's how, when I look at my friends, I know that they're burnt out, is because there's something, so there's that spark behind their eyes that's there. And when it's kind of gone and you just see, well, maybe it's something from, they're just more irritable than normal, right? I'm sure we've all been in that place. A little more irritable, or like easily irritable, or it's just the fact that, I'm like, they don't look like they're having as much fun as they usually are. They're not as engaged, right? And I think that's, the best thing we can do for our friends is to tell them, hey, I'm noticing this, right? Are you feeling it? And I think, I don't know if this is where you're going to go, Liz, but I think that, I personally have certainly, in you can say sort of, we all have these traits, right? And they kind of have the dual sides, the yin and yang to them. I won't say good or bad, because things I don't believe are inherently good or bad, but there's, some of my determination and really drive to get things done. The flip side of that is that stubbornness of maybe not willing to admit that, maybe I am a bit tired and maybe I should take a break. But I think that remembering how much more we can do when we're well rested, and and better, right? How many people have worked on a task and realize that they were tired when they're working on it, and you spend so much time on it, you just realize, actually, if I probably just went to bed, got some good rest, took a holiday, and came back, and I did it with fresh eyes, not only do you do it faster, but you probably do it in a better way, because you can kind of see the forest through the trees. So I think it's just reminding ourselves.
Yeah, we had our CTO go on vacation recently and came back and got twice as amount of work done before he left. And we're like, just go on vacation more often. You're so much more productive. You're so much super efficient. And I think that's true for everyone. Another test that, I often do for myself is just checking in if I still have that passion and drive for what I love to do. It reminds me when I first experienced burnout, I was on kid number 2. He was probably about a year and a half old. It was my 8th year at American Express. And I just remember being like, I'm not really interested. And so now looking back, I said to myself, well, back then when I first joined the company, I was like, I'm going to be CEO one day. I'm going to take over Ken Schnell's job. And then 8 years later, I literally went down through the list. I said, well, I don't want the CEO job anymore. It looks really boring. Do I want to report into the CEO? Oh, that looks terrible too. I literally went down the ranks back to where I was today, and even looked at my peer set to be like, would I want anybody's job here? I was like, no, I'm out. And for me, I didn't realize at that time that really was burnout for me. Because how could somebody who started on day one, who had ambitions to become CEO of the company, find that there's nothing of interest to them in that company anymore. You know, the company didn't change on me, right? I changed, right? And what I changed most was that I had two children who were really young and balancing a, you know, trajectory in a company. And it was really, really challenging. So oftentimes I think if you want to see if you're on that burnout route is, you know, how much excitement and how excited are you about the prospect of growing in your career, or how excited are you about other things in your life? And if you're not that excited, chances are you're probably, you know, on the road to burnout.
Yeah. So one of the things that I instituted was this idea of taking every quarter just a break. And during that break, looking at sort of how I can, you can think of it as optimizing or resetting things, right? And resetting habits, resetting rituals to make my life better. And, you know, I look at it across physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And again, sort of spiritual for people who, you know, this is not faith-based, right? This is that piece that drives your creativity and your sense of purpose, and that you're in a job that you really feel, you know, that inspiration and motivation from. And you're absolutely right. It's like, there's a really interesting way to do this that I love, where you just kind of create, like you have a box of 4 things, right? You have one in each. So you have the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, and draw an X through it. And the middle point is 0. The end is 10. And in each one, you just kind of put yourself onto 0 to 10. Where do you feel like you are on each one? You know, 10 obviously being like you feel completely energized, and 0 being like, oh, we're not in a good place. And with that, you know, looking and seeing kind of where you're maybe have some room for improvement, and asking yourself, well, what is one thing I can do to move that? So for me, in one of the cases, I felt actually emotionally, mentally, spiritually great. Like I loved my job. It was the right job. Mentally, I was really engaged and focused, and emotionally, like, you know, really, really engaged in a good place. But physically, I was just so exhausted. And so I asked myself, I was like, why do I feel like I'm a 4 out of 10? And what is the one habit, right, that I could do to get myself higher? Maybe it's higher to a 5, to a 6, whatever it is, but what can I bring to my life for that quarter to really to improve that score? And for me, I was, you know, I wrote down a few things, and I was like, well, which is more interesting? And for me, it was the realization that I wasn't exercising regularly, and I actually get so much more physical energy once I exercise on a regular basis. So I was like, I need to figure out where I'm putting that, and just, it's just like simple adjustments like that, right? And that's just a very practical, I guess, way in which to execute it. But it kind of comes back to your point of like, you know, Ishwan, you were saying earlier, the habits we had before, right, don't necessarily serve us, or we change. And it's like, how do we distinctively put moments in our lives so that we think about it, so that we're not just on that hamster wheel and like not realizing, right? And, you know, a lot of people do New Year's resolutions. I almost feel like that's the best part of New Year's. And for me, it was like too long to wait, like an entire year. So this kind of quarterly check-in with myself was great. And being away from the office and away from the influences, and taking a holiday to really think about that was super, super helpful. Hi, Pamela. Welcome back.
Welcome, Pamela.
Hello.
I introed you in the beginning, but do you want to give a brief intro for yourself, and thank you for joining?
Oh, yes. And again, my apologies, as in true work-life balance. There are things that were happening literally as I was getting prepped for this call. And I think that it's incredible to have calls like this and spaces like this where we discuss these things in an honest fashion, particularly being women, because there are different dynamics that you deal with when it comes to work-life balance, and trying to just manage your career and everything else. I am a mom of 2. I recently just finished my doctorate, actually like last Tuesday, and I am in the position of transitioning jobs right now. And I've been working full time. I'm also a wife. So work-life balance is something that I manage, I guess, if you could say. And today was one of those wonderful managed days. So I appreciate being on this call, and thank you for allowing me to pop in halfway through.
Of
Pamela,
course.
I just want to say to that, and Liz, Elizabeth, you guys, as we were on the pre-call, right, and you were, kind of like everybody was explaining the situation, just this is the reality, right? And like I loved everybody's just, here's kind of the situation. Let's problem solve it. Let's be flexible. And I think to be that real in our world today, and just, it is what it is, and we all have a lot that we need to balance and work through. And the more, like you said, us women can support each other in this, it is what it is, and it's all going to be okay, right? And it all works out. And now you joined us, so welcome.
Excellent. I'll start off our next question with you, Pamela, if that's okay. So it's often, work-life balance is often a topic that women are expected to discuss and manage on their own. I've been seeing stats that 1 in 4 women are now reducing their work hours or leaving their job because of the current pandemic, having to either take care of their children or manage multiple things. So, what actions can male allies take to support their female teammates, partners, and friends in managing their life and workload?
In my opinion, first of all, ask, are you okay? I think it really starts with that question. Do you need anything? My director, when everything was going on, I am a very vocal person, so I'm going to advocate for myself, but not everybody feels comfortable in being as blunt, as direct as I am. So I think it is incumbent of that person who is in a leadership position to check in and ask. And if you notice slight changes in behavior, like someone is always smiling, but then gradually they just stop smiling, they're not interacting, maybe their camera's off, like, are you okay is a really big thing. And consistently ask, because it also, there has to be trust established. Maybe they won't say something in the beginning, but if you consistently keep asking, they may feel like, oh, well, this person actually cares and I need to share. And then also not taking things personal. Like, for example, the turning on the Zoom camera is a big thing now. And sometimes there are other things going on in the world and in their personal lives that they might be juggling and struggling with. And maybe that day they're not able to turn on their camera, but that doesn't mean they're not going to bring 110% at work, because as we can see that women are definitely pulling insane hours while trying to manage a family and trying to produce their, whatever they're supposed to be producing. So I think it really starts with just, are you okay? And consistently asking that question.
Liz, I also add to that I'm seeing a lot more men getting involved at home, not just with the kids, but also with housework. So now that there's a lot more women in leadership positions who have men on their team, I think it's also a question that women leaders should be asking their male colleagues as well, on how they can support them. So that's one. And then second, what I also am seeing is I think leaders can do a good job on just giving everybody a mental break. So sometimes it might have to be like, hey, this is for me. Sometimes I send out emails at 11 p.m. and I will start with, please do not respond to this. This is the only time I can get this email out to you, but I am not expecting a response back until tomorrow. Right. So at least set those, expectations, just so that when people think you're working, they have to be working. Like, let's try to dispel some of that as well as leaders in our own organizations.
I love that. And it's a little bit tangential, but it reminds me of, I was talking to a friend who works in HR for a different company. And they were telling me, I think with everything happening, right, there's a lot of consideration about what maybe new policies or new things that we have to think about, right? New ways in which companies can really support their employees. And my friend and I were talking about how they had somebody who was leaving the organization, and they found out that during the exit survey, well, why are you leaving? Well, it's because actually, I have to work these sort of shifted and different hours because I'm having to take care of the kids and all of this. And my friend said, well, did you talk to your HR partner? Did you say anything? Well, no, I just assumed that, you know, the company wouldn't support me in this, or this really wouldn't work for them. And it was really a shame. And I think so, just reminding people that I think it is an unusual time. And I think there are some new situations where, you know, maybe even things that in the past would not have been, people would not have understood as much. They are more willing to be open and have those conversations. So, you know, Pamela, to your point of like, be willing to kind of speak up. It's also, you know, if you have a unique situation, I think it's worth having those conversations with not only just your line managers, like your company and your HR organization, saying this is my situation, because I think people are willing to be a lot more flexible and understand that, you know, people can get their work done in different ways. It doesn't have to look the same.
And I also want to add to that, I think the rise of the videos of like kids running in on their parents while my kid does it all the time. He brings Legos and he just puts it in the camera, like right here. And luckily he is not here at the moment. And I have to like channel myself, and I'm like, and my director or somebody in leadership will be like, tell us more about the Legos. And then he'll say something and then he'll go off. And just having those pure moments of these videos that keep going viral, showing not even just women, but also men, having those experiences, I think it's humanized us. Because let's face it, if you have to do your work and you have a family or you have other things going on in the background, like the dog barking or jumping up, you know, behind you while you're trying to do like this presentation, this is real life. And so COVID in that sense has been a bit helpful in terms of stripping away, like you can still be human and still get your work done. Aside from all the horrible things, I'm not saying that COVID has been a great thing, but in terms of that piece, I think it's really helped unveil some of that, and hopefully it will continue to push that forward.
Yeah, I think it's been great that it's stripped all the Instagram life out of us, right? Like nobody has a perfect life. I've seen so many bedrooms at this point. I've seen so many living rooms. I've visited everybody's houses. So it's been really nice to see what real people live and look like versus what we see on those posts. So Pamela, I'm right with you on that. You know, I also share that Psychology Today has also talked about stress and burnout as what they called a crossover and contagious. So I think for all of us, as we're thinking about work-life balance, why it's so important for us to monitor this in our life right now. The crossover effect is that sometimes it's either work that spills over into your life. So you have a tight deadline, you have a demanding boss, there's a big project that's looming that's not going well. You're stressed out and you're bringing it into your home life. Or it could be vice versa. You have a sick kid, a sick parent, and you're taking that stress and bringing it into work. What happens is that there is also a contagious effect. So those people around you can actually sense that stress that's going on. So if we're all living really close, tight quarters like we are today during COVID, those around us can actually sense our stress and also take it on themselves, right? So this is why it's so bad for us to, you know, live in this constant state where we're not finding balance, where we're not finding presence. And I feel like, you know, we should really applaud the people who have quit their jobs because they had to make a really hard choice, right? I'm sure it didn't come lightly. There's financial implications, you know, there's the career implications, but at the end of the day, it's about their mental health. And I think we all should make sure that, yes, it is just a job, but we only have one life, as one of my investors tells me all the time, like make sure that you are protecting your life because you'll find other jobs. So, you know, I think it's really important for us to say sometimes when there's too much, we really got to take things off our plate. And let's really think thoughtfully about what those things are.
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Lauren, sorry.
No, I was just saying, I love that.
I mean, in the same vein, I'm wondering, you know, as a leader, employees often turn to their leaders as models of work-life balance. How can managers support their team to have open and honest communications about employees' needs and boundaries? Lawrence, I know this is something you've been kind of a project you've been starting.
I'm very, very passionate about this one. And I think it is a complex one, right? Because, you know, how do you create the psychological safety for people to feel like they can come and they can tell you these things, right? And Pamela touched upon one thing, right, which is where you ask regularly, you check in regularly, you have to do it in a very authentic way. I think there's certainly instances where you have to model that behavior, and Ishwan pointed that out too, right? Like if you're saying, I really believe in your work-life balance, I want to make sure your health and mental well-being is okay, but then you're stressed out constantly, right, and frantic, then you're sending mixed messages. So, there's certainly those aspects. We're looking at it with my team in multiple different ways, right? So setting up some of these conversations in psychological safety kind of groups, but it's also like we were looking at how do we maybe help people kind of solve their own problems, right? So doing a bit of breakouts and talking to people and saying, flipping it around to say kind of what, instead of, because I think people start to get nervous when you start to pinpoint like, what is not working for you or what's not going right. And it's just like, how do we get you to a better place of mental health? How do we, help your day just be slightly easier, right? And if we start to talk in terms like that, like what can we unlock for you? And getting people to kind of have these small group conversations and really then bring up some of those key themes and key topics. I think then we can start to look in two different ways. We can take some of those key themes and see how maybe organizationally we can do some restructuring or rethinking to support some of those common areas of opportunity. But it's also looking at then, how do we have the conversation, force the conversation, kind of enable them to kind of think about these things for themselves. And we're also looking at other technology platforms. So there's a really interesting company, Wisdom Labs, that we've been talking with about how they have a mental health services app, like an app. So think of a Headspace or a Calm, but it's for work, and it's very specific to moments in your work day where you might need kind of just a breath in a different way. So it could be about, driving creativity during lunch or rejuvenating yourself, or like, how do you, you're feeling a little tired at the beginning of the day, like how do you get yourself like motivated, right? And so it's very bite-sized things like that. And, they have this really interesting community practice where, again, it's, if people don't know how to use this, right, and they're not used to meditating, or they feel a little bit uncomfortable with it, how do you like get a group together to have this conversation and work through it together? So which is also a great way to build psychological safety, right, especially with teams who might not know each other as well and are forced to collaborate but don't really know how to collaborate. So it's looking at different technology platforms like that we can bring in, and then we're kind of taking it a step further and saying, how do we, if we're starting to see that people, they need to be creative, but they don't have the space for it, how do we help them create that space? And it kind of comes back to the conversation we were having on, in what moments can people be creative and how do we create that environment? And it turns out you don't actually need it to be a physical environment. It doesn't have to be, so we can work in this virtual way. It turns out you actually don't even need that much time. We ran a very interesting kind of breakout session where we gave people 6 minutes, and they came up with some really incredible, really kind of far-reaching moonshot ideas. And I was kind of surprised at how quickly they were able to do this. And you realize that if you just set up the right environment to help people, they really can, you can really kind of get people into a new headspace. And so with that, there was a couple of key factors that we did. So one is giving people permission. It's almost like the sandbox idea. It was very strange, but we basically said, this is not the moment where you're don't think about like, doesn't have to be right. This is a brainstorm moment. We don't have to think about reality. Like, take yourself out of your day job, take yourself out of your moment. This is a moment where it's about dreaming big. There is no failure. So it's almost like really creating that separation from what they're, meant to do, and saying, okay, you've got permission now. Here's this sandbox area. So whether it's the next 6 minutes or it's, from Google, they have every other Fridays, right, where they start to play around and start to incubate new ideas. Whatever that sandbox moment is, we create that. And it can be virtual or physical. And we talked about changing the space around you. So if you're in the same space, a lot of times you just think very linear. That's how we are, right? So we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where there's a balance that always has to happen between familiarity and structure, so that you feel like you're standing on solid ground. You need that familiarity in order to actually be able to create and like have the psychological safety and that foundation set so that you can really dream big. So I think a lot of why we were seeing that we weren't being creative is because everything was new. We had to go figure out how to get to the grocery store. We were not feeling safe. The pandemic was happening. We had to take care of our kids. And so once we can actually, you know, as an organization or a company, or, you know, as friends, or create this structure, this as much support to reduce instability in these foundational things, and making sure that, again, we as a company, or we as teams or managers are doing as much as we can to reduce that instability at that base level, then we can build this sandbox for people, and we can kind of create kind of something different than their normal everyday environment. So maybe a different type of, you know, virtual breakout session, or just even just kind of like everybody has different outfits on, or, you know, like whatever way we want to do to just to kind of like take them out of their day and build this permission sandbox to say, okay, even for the next 6 minutes, we're going to brainstorm about this. We found just incredible shift in people's ability to create. And that kind of space really took us away from, again, like bringing this back to mental health and burnout, right? These are kind of the moments that we crave, you know, and haven't been giving ourselves almost permission to create and innovate, in order to kind of get us out of the cycles of day-to-day groundhogs. So I realize a lot of words and a lot of different things that we're doing, but I thought I'd just share kind of some of the different things, if any of that resonates with people.
Yeah, I think as a leader, if you haven't changed what you have been doing since, I would say, June, it's probably time for a change. One of the things that we have done, you know, I think when COVID first hit and we were forced to work from home, we really feared losing connection with our teammates. So we set up a whole bunch of calls every day. We would even do like, you know, morning check-ins with our coffee. And then over the last month, we realized that those meetings weren't as productive anymore. So we got rid of them, right? We wanted to talk to each other throughout the day to kind of make sure that we're feeling like we're working together. But that we found was very disruptive during our day as well. You know, you're focused for a few minutes and then you're jumping onto another meeting. So we decided to kind of consolidate all of our meetings into the morning time to really give people that space in the afternoon to focus and getting their work done. Some of the other things that we have done that I still look forward to, and one thing we kept, is our Fun Fridays, where we come together as a team and someone will be designated to be the team leader to initiate a game. And what's great about that is that it just gives you that human moment to really learn about someone one-on-one and just to have fun, right? So it's low stress, you know, no agenda, and it's a great way to kind of learn about somebody else. We've done stuff on, you know, on Zoom, you could do whiteboards, so you can actually play like Pictionary or, you know, Guess Who. We even said, you know, show us your favorite artwork, because we were missing going to museums. So it was like people pulling out artworks from the woodworks to kind of show us what they like. And that gave you a little personality of who they are. So I think, you know, again, just what Florence was saying, you know, mixing it up. I think mixing it up is really key. And that's something that leaders can do today to help us kind of regain a little bit of new and exciting and something worth living for in this period of time.
Absolutely, 100%. I think that those are all great ideas and suggestions for leaders that are a bit different in a way of mixing things up than kind of what we've been doing. I think a lot of leaders are you know, not sure how to get and start reigniting that creativity and passion and excitement in their teams again. You know, along those lines, how can we make space and foster creativity for ourselves? Ishmael, I know you had said something that resonated with me about identifying the Zappers, and Florence as well, identifying the Zappers and the Rejuvenators. Do you mind going into a little more detail on that?
Absolutely. So, what I always say to people who are saying, well, how do I combat burnout? I think one is to identify activities that kind of fall into three camps. For me, they are the rejuvenators. They're activities that I do that helps me restore, right? So these might be listening to some fun music, even karaoke, going for a walk. And then there are the energizers. These are like imagine if your energy had caffeine and just drank a cup of coffee and you're really on a go. So doing a Zoom call like this is a great energizer for me. I get so much out of it. And after I hang out with you guys, I can seriously feel like I can run a marathon, right? That's an energizer. And then there's stuff like looking at spreadsheets for me, or Excel of any sort, or doing research. Sorry, Pamela. Like that for me, I know Pamela is like so excited. She's like, get me into it. That's an energizer for me. For me, that's a zapper. So I have to be really mindful of my time. If I spend a lot of time doing zappers, one, I try to make sure that I know what those activities are that are zappers, and I try to keep them at a minimum. And then two, I always try to put either an energizer or a restorative activity right after that. So I'm not continuously doing zapper activity after zapper activity. That's just not good for me. So that's how I kind of manage my energy around the tasks that I do.
I love that. I think that is a great idea. It's hard to recognize too, when you have to be more mindful. It's, about throughout your day, what it is you're doing. That's really bringing on the good energy and taking energy out of you and making sure, you are kind of balancing and weighing those out. Florence, did you want to add? Sorry, I saw you.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, I feel like I'll leave it there. The Zapper, this is incredible. And I just noticed that we had a couple of Q&A that came through. So I definitely wanted to leave time for us to answer.
Okay. And Pamela, did you want to add? Okay, all right. So we're going to go to the Q&A now because we've got just a few minutes left. So Rachel Schoenig she said, I'm starting my dream job next week, fully remote. Congratulations. Yay. What are your recommendations to build trust with the team and demonstrate my value right while onboarding remotely? Thanks again for sharing your insights. Love the points on valuing mental health and establishing psychological safety. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so what are the recommendations for building trust within the team while onboarding remotely?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with just an idea. I'm sure Pamela and Ishmael will have some great ones too. I think trust takes a while to build, right? So, I think for me, meet and greets, one-on-ones, really getting kind of that initial time with people, and whoever's, people are busy, but whoever's willing to give you that time, right? To really set those up and just get to know one another, right? Any kind of project or anything I've seen that's successful, it really gives it that bit of first time to get to know each other on more of a human level. And I think, being open to how that looks depending on that other person's personality, and not feeling like you're trying to push too hard, but that it just kind of happens somewhat organically. I think that really helps for them to understand sort of where you're coming from, for you to understand where they're coming from. And, I consider it sort of slowing down before you can kind of speed up. So really, how do you just get to know one another and understand kind of their motivations and how you fit with them and the best way to work with them and talk to them. And I think, by the way that you're already thinking about this and you're mindful of it, it will naturally happen. You're obviously somebody who's very mindful of it and taking the time and respectful about it, just even in the way that you wrote kind of the question, right, is it will come across naturally. And congratulations on starting your dream job. That's awesome.
Yes, congratulations. That's awesome. There is a book called The First 90 Days by Michael D. Watkins. You can check that out. My leader gave me that as something to just look at. You can look at the cliff notes, really, to be honest, because I did that and I got the gist of it, true transparency. But yes, being completely honest and meeting with people, as Florence was saying, I think was key for me when I first started in my role that I'm currently at and going into my new role. And actually finding things that you connect with on a human level, because with people, aside from the work, we already know you're smart. We already know that you bring skills to the table. But in terms of how you connect with the humanness of that person is what's going to catapult them. Like when things get difficult or when deadlines are, right around the corner, that's what's going to say, hey, that person, I can work with that person, or I'm going to go the extra mile for that person. So really don't not pay attention to that piece, because I think that is a very critical piece that people tend to overlook. We already know you can do the job because you were hired to do the job. So focus on the human element and everything else will fall into place. But that book also, get the Cliff Notes, it helps.
So I think I got the cliff note of that cliff note because one of my managers gave me the 90-day work plan. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
It literally has so definitely worth looking at. I was actually going to suggest the 90-day plan as well. I think what's different about, starting a new job during COVID is that you don't have that accidental bumping into people at the office, especially if you're 100% remote. So I would suggest over communication. Don't feel like you can over communicate in your first job, and also have things that's written down. Meaning that, if you have a 90-day plan, it's written out, you can share it with your manager, and identify things that, you think you would need resources to. Who is the best person I should go talk to if I have a question on this? And you're documenting it on who that point person is, and who to reach out to. Where can I find certain things? I think are some of the things that you might want to think about. Again, physically not being in an office may make it a little bit more challenging. If it's anything like our Google Share Drive, it's a nightmare. So you'll definitely need some guidance on how to navigate, internal storage documentation and all that stuff. But I think, again, just over communication is key to setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that I just came to mind when you ladies were speaking. One of them is, listening, right? So I think, one of the things I learned when I was from kind of younger through my journey is, if you come in kind of too hot and you want to do things, right, that can come off the wrong way too. So really just kind of listening and understanding and taking the temperature of the environment that you're walking into to understand kind of how best to show up, I think is really important. So you'll find that, as part of your 90 days. And then I think another thing that builds trust is really showing, especially as we're virtual, right, is showing that you live up to your commitments. So whether it's a small commitment or a big commitment, right, and respecting that other person, whether it's respecting their time, or, like Ishwan said, to over communicate if for some reason you have to break that commitment. Because I think that we just think, oh, well, I had to do this, or maybe they won't remember, or they don't really care that in the meeting when we met, I said I'd follow up with this thing, right? It's just each of those little things can really build trust, or it can kind of break it. And I think because we're virtual, they probably have a little bit more weight, right? Because they don't see that you're busy doing these other things. They don't really understand your full context. And so they might not give you that gratitude of just assuming that you got pulled in other directions by your manager or things like that. So just being very mindful of those two things, I think, is important.
Absolutely. I think these are all really great points. And thank you for the question, Rachel, and congrats again on your new job. We have just a minute left, but Simi had written in, Simi Subramanian. Hi, Simi. Pre-COVID, when we were all working from the office, people could see and know that I'm in another meeting or another call and wait for me to be available. Now everyone assumes I'm available all the time. So I always have people pinging me, multiple people pinging me, or calling me at the same time, even though I'm in a meeting. How do we enforce this boundary in a virtual world with peers? Great question.
Set boundaries. I think you have to set boundaries. And you might not be able to answer the pings or the calls while you're in a meeting. You want to give your full attention to where, like if you're on video, you want to give your full attention to that person because you want to be respectful of their time. And then let the other person know, hey, unfortunately, I couldn't answer because I was in another meeting, but here this is the time I'm available. If this would work with you, then let's schedule. Be very clear. And then another thing that I have done is that I have 2 days specifically that I have set for random meetings. You can just book anything on my calendar. It's open, it's up to date. Let Outlook be your friend, or whatever calendar medium you use. But those 2 days, that is it. The other days, they're very strictly monitored, because there are things that I have to do during those times, or there are already meetings that are reoccurring that are carved out. But just, I mean, you have to set boundaries, or else you're going to end up driving yourself crazy, just to be blunt. So that's, my advice with that.
Yeah, I love that, Pamela. As I was going to say, I don't know enough exact context to can I answer specifically, but one of the things that I think about here is trying to understand sort of how to teach people how you work best, or like kind of help people understand how to work with you, right? So we all have different styles, and I'll just share mine as an example, and you can extrapolate however that works for you. But one of the things is I'm not an email person so much. Like I just get so, my context of my job, right? I get so many emails that I could literally do emails all day, not finish them, and not ever produce anything, right? Or do my job. So for me, one of the things that I talked to my team about and then told my peers was basically like, if you need me, text me, right? Or like, and if you need something immediately, send me a text. So even if you have to send it as an email, text me and say, hey, I have this action for you, and be very specific when they need it from me by, like, I need this within, and try to understand, because I think you're right. Like it's, if people are always pinging you, there's this anxiety, right? And you have like, well, I have to answer back. Are they going to think I'm not doing my job? Are they going to, what is all of that kind of buildup going to be? Because we don't know what they're thinking. So if we kind of set that intention and set that style and say, hey, if you need something from me, please work in this way, and then I'll make sure to monitor it. Then you're already setting those boundaries and setting that stage, so that you don't feel like you don't feel a sense of guilt, or you don't feel like you're not operating in their set of rules, right? Because you're creating your own set of rules. You're making it super clear to them. You're saying like, this is how I work if you need something, and this is how we can collaborate together.
I'll just add, Simi, that use technology as your friend. So I'm not sure if you're being pinged on Slack, but Slack has a great way to say that your status. So change your status, like not online until X time, just so that people know when to expect you again. Even if people are emailing you, there's out of office auto replies where you can literally have one set up that says, I'm going to be checking my email at these hours today, so expect me to respond then. So you can automate a lot of these things is what I'm trying to share with you. So think creatively along those lines, where you can set up, very visible notifications on when you're going to, look at certain things and when you can get back to them without you having to be there and respond to each and every one of them.
I was going to say, I've seen some of my colleagues do the same thing in Microsoft Teams, of having that automated message. Hey, best way to reach me, shoot me an email. I might not get to you right away. I'm in the middle of a few things. And that kind of manages the expectation ahead of time. So I agree. I think these are all great techniques. But just looks like we're over on time. I'll hand it back to Elizabeth. Thank you again to everybody who attended, and all our wonderful, amazing, insightful speakers. And I think thank you to Elizabeth as well for helping to put this together. And WICT.
Yes, again, thank you so much to WIC for providing us the opportunity for this group to get back together and have a conversation about work-life balance again. We enjoyed it so much. As you saw in the chat, we sent over some resources, so get connected with the speakers. Check out what we have going on. Follow Breaking the Glass on LinkedIn. We have another webinar coming up with WICT on November 4th. It's leadership from entry level to the C-suite. That's going to be another amazing panel, so I hope that you can all join us again then. We've also recorded this as well, so we'll send out a follow-up with the recording, so share it with your friends. Like, we're all busy, but we can all use the advice. So again, thank you so much, and I'm just going to start the round of applause among the panelists before we hang up. Again, thank you for joining us. Y'all have like a great rest of your day, okay?
Nice seeing you all. Bye, ladies.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.